Hello everyone. We are at webcast 3. This is week 9 with InDesign Level 1. And we're going to move from working with layers to getting into text fundamentals. I think we're going to pretty much be with text for the remainder of this week, and for the week we get back from spring break. So I will probably be recording some things during break so that anyone who wants to jump in as soon as they get back to school can, or if people are trying to catch up during that week, I want to give everyone as much flexibility as possible to try to work through as much as they can. So don't be panicked when you start seeing labs going up on the WordPress site, because I'm probably going to post a little bit ahead of time, so in case people want to get a jump on labs when they don't have to listen to webcasts, they have that opportunity. But no one is expected to do that over the break. As I said, I'm just trying to give as much flexibility to people as possible. One thing I would like to discuss really quickly before we get into text fundamentals, because in a very small way it does relate to text, is a question that came up this week about a student who was asking a question why they had clicked on a text frame, gone into text frame options and created an inset, and then went back to change it, and the inset options had changed to only a single option instead of the left, right, top, bottom. And I want to talk about a very probable cause for this, though unless I see it, I can't guarantee that this is something that can happen. So I'm going to go through this scenario before we get started, because as you start working more with your text frames, this is something that can happen. I just have as you can see, I have a 1.5 page document for our discussion tonight. And then over here, let me let this refresh, I have a very small text frame to use as my demonstration for this question. I'm going to click on this text frame, and I want to create a text inset around the outside. So I'm going to right click, go to my text frame options, nothing new to anybody, and I'm going to make sure that my link is broken so that I can put in a separate measurement for top, bottom, left, and right. Starting with top, I'm going to type in a P4, bottom, let's say P5, left, P3, and probably right, I'm going to place a P3 so that the left and right are even. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that default to aligning the vertical justification to the top. Click OK. And I can see that I have a slight inset. And if I deselect this text box and I go back in, I check text frame options, sure enough, I see what I input just a few moments ago. My inset spacing is exactly as I placed it, and all 4 fields are active. I can go ahead and cancel out of this, and now I'm going to make a very slight change. This can happen accidentally through a series of possibly double clicking. The engineers have made it a little bit more difficult to do this by accident, but it happens. Somehow your selection tool goes into direct selection tool editing. And if you remember, if I create a frame and I use my selection tool, you'll remember that we can change. Let me let this refresh catch up. Right? I can change the frame proportionally or disproportionately. But if I use my direct selection tool, notice all 4 corners, the anchors for those paths highlight. So if I deselect by clicking off of that frame and then I go back in, I have 3 hollow anchors and 1 filled in. By dragging that anchor, I can distort the shape of that frame very easily and come up with all kinds of very cool things that I can fill with color or whatever I want to fill it with. The exact same scenario can happen with a text frame, because essentially they are both the same thing. They are frames. They are containers. So in this instance, somehow we might get the direct selection tool or its functionality, and even just the slightest nudge of this corner, I'm going to move it just ever so slightly, you would be hard-pressed to see that difference zooming out. Now, if we zoom in a little bit, and I'm hoping that this will show up on the webcast, I can see a slight jog here in my frame edge. I see another very slight jog here, one here, here, and here. And then there's another little one down here. But you'd have to be looking for this to probably see it, because I'm not seeing a great amount of distortion in the text. I would if I had moved this way over, but with this tiny little adjustment, it may not be obvious that anything is out of the ordinary. Now I go back to my selection tool, and maybe in the meantime I had clicked on a rectangle tool or an oval tool, so I wouldn't even have noticed that my direct selection tool may have been selected or was even out of selection mode editing. When I click back on this frame and then I go back into my text frame options, notice that my bottom, left, and right options are grayed out. All I have now is an inset of P4, which you'll remember is if you have any shape other than a rectangle, whether that's an oval or a diamond or a star, you only have one option for an inset, and that has to be a constant inset all the way around the inside of that particular shape. So you look at this and think, how is this possible? I'm in a rectangle, and yet I've lost these three areas that I can adjust for an inset. One of the things that I do just to be absolutely sure that this is exactly what the problem is I go back out and I select a corner and I compare it to another corner on the rectangle. You've all been through this XY coordinates. This is your horizontal ruler number, and this is your vertical ruler number. So Y is vertical, X is horizontal. We know from just what we know about a rectangle that the two left sides should be at the same horizontal point on a ruler. So if I click on this corner here and I look at the X value, I can see that I have negative 15 P1.5. I'm going to copy that. Now I'm going to go down, deselect, and then click the bottom left-hand corner. Negative 15 P1.5. So I know that these two are in alignment horizontally. Now I'm just going to work my way around the rectangle. I'm going to click on this one, and now I'm going to check the vertical scale. The vertical measurement, because I know also from what we know about rectangles and squares is that this point and this one on the far right should be at the exact same number on the vertical ruler, because they should be, this should be an absolute straight line. Just as this should be a straight line, going across the top should be a straight line, and going down again. So I look at this number after I've selected it, notice that it's filled in as opposed to being an open anchor. That means that this one is selected. And I read this and it tells me that it's at 22P3.6. Just click on this one here, 22P3.6. So far I know that this anchor point and this one are in alignment, this one and this one are in alignment. Now let's check these two far on the right. Click on this one. And now I'm back to my horizontal ruler. So I look at the X and I see that's negative 4P1.8. And I'm going to copy that. Go up to the top. Oops, negative 4P0.6. I'm off. Just ever so slightly, but I am off. So I'm going to paste the value of the one at the bottom into the value for the top one. And when I press the Tab key, these two are now in alignment on the X or the horizontal direction. Now let's check these last two. I have this one over here again. We'll go back to that one. And we know that this point and this point should be at the same point on the vertical ruler. This one on the vertical ruler says that it is 7P10.5. I'm going to copy that just in case the one on the right is wrong. Select this one, and I have 7P9.6. Those two are off. They're not the same. So in order to, and it wouldn't matter whether I made this one the same as this, or I took the left and made it the same value as the right. The point is that both of these have to have the same vertical number. So I can highlight this field and paste, press the Tab key, and now I know that this is a true rectangle. I have alignment vertically or horizontally between each of the side points, and I have vertical alignment across the top and across the bottom. So now when I switch back to my selection tool and I click on this box, I'm going to right click, go back in my text frame options, and I've got my 4 fields back because now InDesign recognizes this as a true rectangle. It knows that each corner is a 90-degree angle, and that in fact it does have the power to give me different offsets. And what's I think even more interesting is that it gave me back the offsets I had in here before I lost them. So somehow it was keeping that in memory, even though once it didn't recognize it as a rectangle any longer, I was given only a top or an inset of P4, and that was the inset that was going to be applied to all 4 sides. So hopefully this is what the problem was, and that can be rectified. If not, please send me an email and let me know. All right, let's get back to more text fundamentals. I'm just going to zoom in here on the top part of this page. Don't worry that some of this text is off. This is going to come in later in the webcast. What I want to focus on at the beginning here are just very basic word processing skills. I want you to be able to do what you do in any other word processor on a daily basis. So think about the things that you do in, let's say, Microsoft Word or in even a text editor. You want to type. You want to format text, make it larger, smaller, bold, italic. And these are the things that we're going to talk about first. If I want to type, we know that you just have to be in the Type tool, click anywhere in a document, or in a text frame I should say, and you can just start typing. And everything that you type or you backspace over is going to behave just the way you would expect it to. So I use my backspace key or my delete key. I can delete going in a forward direction by using the forward delete key on a PC or using function delete on a Mac. That's the way to delete going forward on a Macintosh, which took me forever to find out. I was so in shock of not having my forward delete key because I use it so often that I was so excited when someone told me that that's how I can do it on a Macintosh. But what happens if we want to start changing the formatting? As with everything else in InDesign, I have several different ways I can do that. I'm going to highlight just this first line of type. And I know that all of you have done some of what I'm going to be talking about in at least tonight's webcast and in the live webcast, and probably through several of the webcasts going on that I'll be recording next week in preparation for your return from spring break. But I want to make sure, as I've said this several times before, that you have a place to go back to, that you can get all of the information in one location, or in case you have missed something along the way, I'm hoping this will fill in the holes for you. If I want to change the size of this line of type, I can always go to the Type menu, and notice I have my font command, my size command, so I could change that to 18 points if I wanted to. You can see that that type increased. I'm going to press Control Z or Command Z if I was on a Mac. I can also go to my character panel, which I do not keep docked. Some people do. I don't, because I have all the functionality of those two panels for paragraph and character across the top, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And I know I've said this before that I'm not a big fan of having these two docked, but let me just bring them out for a moment. I can access those from the Type menu by choosing character or paragraph. Both of them come up at the same time. Let me just drag these over here. For some reason I wanted to jump on my other monitor. But I can see that everything that I see here in this panel is functional going across the top of my control panel. Because remember, our control panel is context sensitive. So as long as I have my type tool selected, and as long as it has an insertion point in any text frame, I'm going to see my font family, the style, the size, the leading, and all kinds of other information that I see right here. And this is going to be true for my paragraph as well. If I switch from my character context sensitive attributes to my paragraph, I see that I have basically the same type of information. Here's all of my alignment. Here's my indent here. This is left and first right here. I have my right indent and last line indent. Those are right here. I have my space above, space below, which are right next to each other here. And I have my drop caps here, which are right here on my control panel. Hopefully you guys can see my mouse moving around circling this. I even have the ability to turn on and off hyphenation without having to go to my control panel menu, which I tend to do just because we haven't always had a hyphenate checkbox and I tend to forget it. So I can turn that on and off here and here. So I don't really see the advantage of having these panels up, but I want you to be aware that if I wanted to change my type size here, I can do that. And sure enough, it takes effect there. I'm going to go ahead and close these two panels for the moment. Of course, my favorite way to change type is to use my control panel going across the top because it's always there when I am in text mode. Text editing mode, I should say. So I go back to my character attributes and I can change this yet again to something larger. I can change my line spacing to something much larger. And I can use many of these other type attributes, which we're not going to get into all of these tonight. I just want to talk about the major ones. Going back to size for just a moment, just as a reminder, type is measured in points, which is a vertical height that we're measuring. So we often say, I want the type to be 12 points, or I want it to be 24 points. And in InDesign, we have the range of 0.1 point, that is really, really small, all the way up to 1,296. And I want to show you an example of a very large piece of type. I drew a text box across this entire page, and I put in one character, and then I put it on another layer, which you guys will all know how that works. And I locked it. I put it as an image even though it is a piece of type. Let me turn that eyeball on. And I'm not sure if you can see this, so I'm going to turn off my hidden characters for just a moment. And actually, let me make this a little darker because I'm noticing on my second monitor that this is not dark enough, even though it looks really dark on my first monitor. But I want this to be real clear to everyone. So what I did is I took this font character, and if I double check here, I can see that it is Adobe InDesign Pro, which everyone should have on their machines because I believe it gets loaded automatically with InDesign. Still today, I think it does. And it's just regular. It's one of the really pretty ornaments that come with Adobe InDesign Pro. And I just blew it up to 570 points with a leading of an auto leading of 684. And it just sits there screened back. To do that, I made it black. And then I went into my swatches panel and I changed the tint to something much lighter than 100%. Originally I had it at something like 9 or 10, but in order for this to show up on my second monitor for the webcast, I noticed I had to go up closer to something like 28. Which means that that's just 28% of the full color, which happens to be black in this case. All right, so there's an example of a ginormous character. That is a single character there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide that, lock that layer so that it's not in our way as we talk a little bit more about sizes. One thing that if you have not noticed already, which some of you have probably noticed without even thinking about it, is that the same size type in different fonts can look like a different size. And I have several lines of type in different types of fonts to demonstrate this. The first line is Minion Pro. The second line is Times New Roman. Now, each of these lines, if you look at my size up here, as I'm dragging across 12, 12, 12, 12, and 12. And yet, to me, they do not look like they're the same size type. Of all of them, the Times Roman to me looks the smallest, and this one at the bottom, Century Gothic, looks to me to be the biggest. Some of this has to do with the fact that certain fonts have descenders that go farther down than other fonts. For example, you see the G on the Minion Pro? I'll just highlight that so everybody can see it. Do you see how the bottom portion of that G is taller and rounder than, let's say, the G in the Times New Roman? Do you see how the descender is kind of squished here? And then if we go down even further to a G in this font, which is Century Gothic, it's a sans serif, so it's not a closed descender, it's open, but it's very, very shallow. And for Myriad, let me just type a G here. You can see that this G and this G look extremely different, right? This G versus this G. This is much wider. The open part of the circle portion of the G is much rounder, where this one has a more compressed look to it. So just because you're working with 12-point type per se, that doesn't mean that you can say across the board, oh, well, I work in 12-point type when I'm doing text that has several paragraphs, because every font is going to make that look and feel either bigger or smaller. And it's also going to have an impact on your leading, the lines of type here and the space between them. And remember, leading is measured from the baseline, and the baseline is this area of the type. It's measured from baseline to baseline. Oops, I was supposed to copy. Oh, and it's not copying. That is really interesting. I wonder if it's there and it's just not showing up. Yep, that's the case. All right. Maybe this is an artifact again of CCC Converter. Hopefully it's not. I'm going to turn on my hidden characters. Let's just see if we can. Oh, we cannot get those guides to stick. Let's go and see if we've got something going on with our grids and guides. Our guides are showing. Anyway, unless I have them selected, we can't see them right at the moment. But when I select them, I'm hoping you guys can see this line going underneath this and here. Notice it slices right through the descender, which is the part that goes below the baseline, and ascender is the part that extends up above this main little block of type, which are usually defined pretty close by your lowercase letters. So I can see that I have 12-point type, but it has a leading of 16. And that's what we're seeing here. Between this baseline and this baseline is 16 points. This looks like a lot of space for this particular set of fonts, but some fonts will have descenders that hang down even farther, or ascenders that extend on top, and you'll look at a lot of type and say, this is just too cramped, and you'll need to increase the line spacing. So I wish there was a way to say, oh, when you're working with lots of type, you should always be in this point size. I would say, though, that the range is usually between 9 and 12 points, but it's going to depend on what font you're using. All right, let's move on. When you are selecting type, I want to just talk about a couple of different things that, again, I'm sure you've experienced already. To select a single word, you just double click, 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 triple click, selects a line, 4 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, selects an entire paragraph, and 5 clicks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, selects the entire story, the entire flow. So because this page is threaded to the second page, it selected everything on both pages, but not in my little sidebar here, because this is not threaded to the rest of this. Now this business about triple clicking, selecting an entire paragraph, that can be changed depending on your preferences. So I'm going to go to my Edit menu, drag down here to my Preferences, and I'm going to choose Type, my type preference. And we see that there is a checkbox here that says triple click to select a line. If I turn that off, I'm going to have a different behavior. And click OK. And now when I triple click, 1, 2, 3, it selects an entire paragraph instead of a line. So this is going to depend on the way you want your workflow. Do you want that step in between selecting a word and selecting an entire paragraph? You may want that option of being able to triple click on a single line. I'm going to go back and then turn that back on. There's another one I want to bring your attention to, another option in here in the preferences. And this one is to apply leading to entire paragraphs. InDesign is the only editor, text editor, that I know that allows you to have different leading for different characters. To me that is just so strange. If you're in Microsoft Word and you put your cursor in a paragraph and you change what would be line spacing in Microsoft Word, you're going to find that that's going to change across the entire line of type. But that's not the case in InDesign, which can really get you into some trouble sometimes. It makes you have to really be sure that if you want to, oh, and I guess I did not change that and stick it. Hang on, let me go back and put that back on. Triple click for a single line. Sorry about that. If I want this whole line to have an increased line spacing, I have to be sure the entire line is selected. Because if I only select 3 words and then I increase the line spacing, notice that this believes it has 20-point line spacing, but this word thinks it only has 16. I just think that's incredibly confusing. Now, instead of changing the preference, I tend to just make sure that I select the entire line or an entire paragraph. And now it's blank because it's saying you have 2 different leadings selected and I don't know which one to display, which is what InDesign always does when you have mixed attributes selected. So you're going to have to override that by choosing a leading that you want. And in this case 18 is too much, so I'm going to go in and just type in 16 to make sure it's back with what the rest of the paragraph was. Moving to editing with the find and change. There are going to be items inside of a word process document that you may want to change, and instead of changing them by hand, you have access to the find change command, which has several text editing options in it, which will save you a lot of time. My 2 pet peeves, it just drives me nuts, is that anybody who's working in Microsoft Word will usually hit the space bar multiple times when there aren't supposed to be multiple spaces. So you'll see things like, in fact, I just saw a few of them in here, and where did they go? Here we go. I said space, 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 right? 3 little blue dots. And why am I able to see that? Because on my type menu, I have turned on hidden characters, which are basically just any character that has meaning but will not print. Your tabs, your paragraph returns, soft returns or forced line breaks, spaces, forced to next column, forced to next page. There's just a huge list of those. In fact, I need to put those up on the WordPress. I should write myself a note actually so that you guys have a copy of that. En Reconception put that up on InDesign Secrets, and I think it's always a really nice one to keep by your desk. We have 3 spaces going off to the right, but because this is fully justified, it's pushing the spaces off over into the margin area. So instead of trying to search through this or do a find and change to find each occurrence, we have the option of going into find and change. And one of the things that InDesign got a couple versions ago is grep. And grep is a way to programmatically, I don't know which way to pronounce it, to find things that are not just easy find and change. And they give you several predefined scripts which will do a lot of work for you very quickly. And the ones that I use all the time is multiple space to single space and multiple return to single return. Because of course anyone in another word processor uses paragraph returns all the time to create vertical space like we do in email. I'm going to choose multiple space to single space, and you can see how complex that little script is. And thank goodness I don't have to know why it's going to work. I just know that when I click on Change All, it's going to come back to me and say that in this particular story, it found 10 replacements, which saves me all kinds of work. Now another pet peeve I have, in addition to someone pressing multiple tabs in order to get horizontal space or paragraph returns to get vertical space, is that often when you are working in a text editor, people don't know what the M- key is. And you'll remember we talked about M- in the previous webcast. And an M- is a dash that was part of our language quite a bit until the typewriter came around, and the M- was named that. It's called an M- EM M- and an N EN- as different parts of punctuation for different purposes. The N- would separate numbers, and the M- was often an aside. So in this case it says, and then, see, she did so, and the frog hopped into the room, and then straight on, tap, tap, flash, flash. So they're separating not only this part of the sentence with 2 M-, they're separating the portions of the aside with an M-. And in a well laid out document, you would never want to see 2 hyphens in a row. You want to make sure that that gets substituted with the proper piece of punctuation. So I'm going to place my cursor back at the beginning of the text again, go into my find and change command. Oh, I must have hit the wrong one. Sorry. I might have selected Find Next, which is why it came back that way, and choose Find Change. There we go. I'm going to go back to text. So I'm going to search for 2 hyphens, hyphen, hyphen, and then I'm going to go into this special character. This little @ sign will give me a list of special characters because off the top of my head, I don't know what the symbol is for an M- in a dialogue. In most cases, what you type in a document is different than the sequence that needs to be entered into a dialog box in order to find that character in text. So holding down this little @ sign, I see I've got lots of choices, but I'm looking specifically for hyphens and dashes, and there's my M-. So it's going to look for 2 hyphens, and it's going to replace it with an M-. See if we can find the first one. And I'm going to zoom in. Hang on, let me zoom in first so that you guys can see this as it finds it. I should have done this before, sorry about that. Okay, we're at the beginning. Click Find, and there's our 2 hyphens. I'm going to click on Change, and I see that it gets replaced with an M dash. Can everyone see that nice smooth dash as opposed to hyphen hyphen? And I'm going to move on to Find. And this time, since I feel pretty comfortable that it's replacing these properly, I'm going to click Change Find, which will make the change and move on to the next occurrence. And I kept clicking Change Find until it could not find any more occurrences. It gives me the search is completed. I click OK, and that's taken care of. I use the Find Change significantly through text editing when a client gives me a copy, that, especially if it came from Microsoft Word or it came from a database, because there's so many things that are going to need to be corrected. Often we get straight quotes. These came through curly, which is the way I want them, unless they are inches and feet. So you can search for straight quotes and make them curly quotes, and it understands the difference between a left and a right. So you're not going to have to search for all the left, replace those, and search for all the right-hand ones. It's smart enough to know the difference. As I said, multiple paragraph returns, multiple spaces, different types of dashes. I can usually cut through what would have normally taken me maybe 5 hours of work. I can get done in probably 20 minutes by just using the Find Change command. So take advantage of this. When we get into more formatting, in fact we're going to make an example of this right now, you can also look for something and change its format but not the text. So let's look at that. Often people underline, and excuse my rushing through here, but they underline text that they want to either be a hyperlink or they want it to be italic. You're going to have to know ahead of time what the meaning of that underline was for this particular document. In this case, it was just supposed to be italic. So I don't want to change the word greenwood or shade. I want the text to remain the same. I just want the formatting to change. So I'm going to click before this just so we can see it sooner. And I'm going to get rid of the text. You have to make sure these are blank, because if it's looking for a character, it's going to change that character. I don't want to look for a character. I'm just looking for a format. So I move down. And by the way, if you don't see that area of the Find Change, your Find Change box looks like this. Click on More Options, and Find Format and Change Format will appear at the bottom. I click on the magnifying glass that has the T. Another dialog opens, and it's asking for what formats are you looking for. If I have a character style or a paragraph style, I can go ahead and assign those. But in this case, I'm just looking for some text that has underline. So I need to find that. Where is my underline? And I see I have an option right here. I can turn that on. Click OK. And let's just first see if it's going to find that. Click on Find, and it found Greenwood Shade. Notice it does not select the period or the apostrophe because there is no underline underneath that. All right, I'm going to place my cursor back at the beginning of the paragraph because I need to finish this workflow. Whenever it finds underline, I wanted to change the format to italic. So I just changed the font style to italic. You are going to need to know what italic is called in that particular font, because some fonts don't name their font as italic. It's called oblique, or it may be oblique bold. So you're going to need to know what it is you're going to want to replace that with. And you might have to look at the font family to make sure that you get the exact type of italic name selected. Because if a particular font does not use italic in its font family for the font style, then it's not going to be able to replace it. All right, let's try this now. So I'm going to do a find. It finds it, click change, and it italicized it, but it left the underline, and that's not what I want. So let's go back and see if we can correct this. In the change format, I need to go in and tell it to remove the underline. When you go into any type of a character format and a change format setting, there are 3 states to any checkbox. There's what I call as is, or leave me alone. If I'm on, leave me on. If I'm off, leave me off. Then there is on, and that's my check. And sometimes these checkboxes look different when they're on in different operating systems, but it's usually very clear that this is on. Whether it's a check or it's a different looking check, it'll definitely indicate that that's on. And then if I click a 3rd time, that is off. And that's the only thing I'm going to do. Turn on italic and tell it to make sure it turns off underline. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Try this one more time. Find. It found it, change, and now it's italic and the underline is gone. Let's try that again. I'm going to see if there's another occurrence of this. Find. I've got a line here. Change. Took out the underline, replaced it with italics. I could have even added a color to this if I wanted to. I could have said this is italic, underline, and blue, because maybe I wanted these to be hyperlinks instead of just italic type. So there's any number of things that I can do in here through the find and change that's going to make my life much simpler and much faster and make my work much more efficient. Another thing that I know it sounds like I'm just being a grump tonight, is another pet peeve of mine. I'm going to go ahead and close the find change before we move on here, is that it seems like anybody in a word processor always types in all caps. And this goes back to the typewriter days. We had no way to emphasize type except for underlining and all caps. So I don't know why this still extends decades later, but sure enough, this is what I see people do. And what people don't understand is that a capital T and a capital H is a different character in code than its lowercase counterpart. And if they would have just, instead of typing in all caps, typed the frog parent, then that would give me, as the production artist, much more flexibility in what I can do with that type. And in fact, I can't tell you the number of times I've had to retype sentences and phrases because somebody kept typing it in all caps, and once it was formatted with the style that we needed, we don't want all caps, usually in a professionally typeset publication. The other thing is if all caps is needed ever, it's very easy to just highlight the type and go to my all caps attribute, which is a slight override. It's not changing the ASCII characters per se, but it is applying an all caps attribute to it. And no one's going to be able to tell the difference between these two. And I can go ahead and just turn that off. So think about that when you are inputting type. I would definitely not type in all caps. But because this has always been a problem, InDesign has the ability to change case in many circumstances. So this was typed in all caps. And just to be absolutely sure, I'm going to type it in again, holding down my caps key. And I'm going to highlight this, and we have a command on the type menu called change case. And if you need one of these, it'll do the job for you. And in my case, I want it to be title case. So uppercase I think is very self-explanatory. Lowercase, lowercase. Title case means that each word, I believe, or major word, I'm not sure if it includes prepositions or words under 2 or 3 characters, but essentially it's initial cap. And then sentence style is first letter, capital, and the rest of it lowercase. I'm going to choose title case because I want both the frog and prince, and it has changed. And I can prove this by going into my glyphs panel, highlighting the G, and if I hover over that, which of course is not showing up in the CCC Confirm webcast. But you try this at home, folks, and you'll see that I'm right. You hover over the top of the character and you'll see a omnicode or several code numbers pop up. And I'm saying the wrong word. Anyway, I can't think of it at the moment. Anyway, it'll have a particular number. And then if you highlight the lowercase g, you'll see that it has in fact a different number. So this change case is actually changing the case, the actual characters, and not just applying some attribute over the top of it. This also reminds me of some of these other things that are going to be offered in an open type font, which are really helpful. I have 2 characters that are strung together. This is called a ligature. And what happens is often in type you have 2 letters that are so close together that they overlap. And FK, FL, FT, FF, FB, these are your typical ligatures that end up getting stuck together. So a very high quality font will substitute FF with this character automatically for you because this is the proper way for it to be displayed. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Williamsburg or a place like that where you see the old font charts and you can see that even back then in metal type, ligatures were used quite a bit. This is another really popular one. Do you see how the horizontal bar between the F and a T? If I had typed an F and a T, you'll see that the 2 would have overlapped and actually looked a little funny because there would have been they're bumping into each other here. So anyway, that's what these are for. And if you're in an open type font, it will usually substitute those for you automatically. In fact, let's just try that. If I say the FF, and I zoom in, you can see the TH there has been substituted with a ligature. And see if I can get that. And the FF has been substituted. Because what we're seeing is this character here. Even though I'm seeing it as a double character, you can see that in the type directory, in the glyph, this is a single glyph. That's pretty smart of InDesign to realize that I can still delete one of those F's. And I don't know if you can watch the top of that F. Ever so slightly, it's going to go from its position here, and it's going to bend over. So see it bent over and how it pops up? Because this F stands taller and narrower than this F that goes into a ligature. Pretty cool, right? If any of you ended up doing the subscription to lynda.com, Nigel French, I believe I put that one on the list for the students. I had to choose 5 courses that would be appropriate. And I think I chose Nigel French's, but he does some wonderful webcasts on typography, and I just think typography is absolutely fascinating. But enough of that for right now. Okay. A couple other things that we have available to us here, and let me just use this G as an example. I have superscript, which will not only change the size of the character, but it will move its baseline up. Underline is a very recent addition to InDesign because you're not supposed to use underline in well laid out materials, and so InDesign was not going to have underline, but because of hyperlinks and the common universal symbol for hyperlinks being an underline, I think it finally just gave way. We have, and that came with strike through. So we had the superscript, subscript. We have small caps. I'll show several letters for that, and then we have a strike through. And let me zoom out just a hair here because maybe we want the frog prints, instead of being all caps, to be small caps, which isn't going to work because these were typed in as all caps. So I would have to go through and change the case. So let's highlight this line and click on small caps, which is right underneath all caps. And you can see we get true small caps. which means that the initial cap is a full-size capital letter. The others are the shape of the capital letters, but they are small. In previous versions of fonts, before we had OpenType, this would be a mathematical, basically a squishing operation that went on. And now we have in our glyphs panel, let me go see if I can highlight this guy. And you can see that that is a different character, this small n, than a capital N, which is this one here, which is much further up. So if I move down, there's the capital N here. There's a small cap in there. So we are getting individual characters that have been designed specifically for that purpose. And I know a lot of this is probably really boring to many of you, but when you start getting into realizing how important type is as a design element, I think you're really going to like it. All right. One other thing I wanted to show you. Hang on. And I just need to delete some text here to make this work. We're going to be moving into, in later webcasts that are going to be for week 10, the differences between character formatting and paragraph formatting. And one of the things that's going to be very obvious is that if I needed frog prints to be much larger, and that's why I'm bringing this up here. Let's say I wanted this to be something much bigger than that. Okay. Oh, and he should not have permission to do this. And that's probably because I had played around with this earlier. So let me see if I can put this back in. There we go. That's more like it. This is normally what you get. And let me just increase my line spacing here just to auto for the moment to get this to work a little better. All right. You see how the frog prints is wrapping in this first column? There are several ways to get around this for formatting. One of the things that people do is they bring the triple or the 3-column box down. They create a new text box that straddles all 3 guides, and then they take that paragraph and they place it in the box that straddles. Now, the downside of this is that if I do a select all in here, you can see that it is not threaded to this next set of text. And sometimes it doesn't matter, but other times it might. So other people went and did things like this. They threaded the beginning of the text box. You know how we thread from the back side? We're going to thread from the front side, drag a box across, and now if I show my text threads, you can see that this text box is threaded to this one. And if I added a paragraph, it would flow right down into that next text box. So that's another step. Starting in CS5, I believe, we didn't have this capability in CS4. I'm going to put this back together. Hang on. Okay. This is another way that we can do this. But unfortunately, because of my low resolution, I am not getting, I don't see my control. So I have to do one of 2 things. I may have to go down here and just take a second to customize and see if I can straddle here. Let's see if it's going to let me do this. I'm going to have to turn something off to get this to work. Oh, it's not going to show up. But let's see if I can get to it from another direction here. One of the downsides of one of the downsides of low resolution when you're doing webcasts. Oh, darn it. I might have to come up with a custom workspace in order to show those going across the top, which I will do. So I will move that to the next webcast and I'll show you that one. But basically we now have the ability, if our 3 columns are part of a single text box, not 3 separate text boxes, but a single text box divided into 3 columns, that I can tell any particular paragraph to straddle all the way through. So we'll jump on that at the first webcast going forward. And I think that's about all we need to cover in this particular webcast. The next one we're going to get into will be some of the unique type features that we have in InDesign, like the story command, being able to find fonts that are in use in your documents, go back into glyphs a little bit more and talk a little bit more about some of the other options we have for OpenType fonts and how we can filter that list so that we can get to exactly the character we're looking for. All right, until next webcast, signing off.